My name is Rachel. I'm 27, and I've always been the responsible one while my sister was our father's favorite. At least that's what I believed until I found myself fighting for what was rightfully mine, and uncovered a family secret that would change everything we thought we knew about each other. The day my father died, something else died with him. Trust, security, the illusion of family. I still remember the weight of his hand on mine as he whispered those final words that would haunt me for weeks. The blue box in my study. Only you. His eyes locked with mine with an intensity I'd never seen before, even as his breath grew shallow. I nodded, confused but committed, as I felt my sister Eliza's stare burning into my back from across the hospital room. I didn't understand then what was at stake. I couldn't have known that within days of lowering my father into the ground, I'd be fighting not just for my inheritance, but for my very place in the family. What I'm about to share isn't easy. The betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from someone who shares your blood, your childhood memories, your DNA. But sometimes the most painful truths are the ones that finally set you free. The last goodbye. The hospice room smelled of antiseptic and dying flowers. Dad had been there for 3 weeks, but it felt like years. The cancer had ravaged him, turned the strong man who once carried me on his shoulders into someone I barely recognized. Hollow cheeks, papery skin, eyes that seemed to look beyond this world more often than not. Eliza visited less frequently than I did. "Work is crazy," she'd text. Or, "The kids have soccer." Meanwhile, I rearranged my entire life, taking unpaid leave from my job to sit beside him day after day, reading his favorite Hemingway novels aloud, moistening his cracked lips with a sponge, watching the monitors that counted down his remaining heartbeats. "You always were my rock, Rachel," he told me one lucid afternoon, his voice surprisingly clear. "Your sister, she's like your mother, beautiful, brilliant, but fragile. You're stronger than both of them." I remember squeezing his hand, throat tight with emotion. "Dad, don't talk like that. Listen to me," he insisted, suddenly gripping my wrist with unexpected strength. "In my will, I've made provisions. The house, the investments, they're to be divided equally. But there's something else. Something just for you." My heart stuttered. "Dad, I don't care about any of that. I just want you to get better." He shook his head, a sad smile crossing his face. "We both know that's not happening. Promise me you'll stand your ground. When the time comes, don't let anyone intimidate you." I nodded, confused by his intensity but never questioning it. That was our last real conversation. The night he died, we were all there. Me, Eliza, our Uncle Robert. For a brief, crystallized moment, grief united us. Eliza collapsed against my shoulder, sobbing like I hadn't seen since we were children. Uncle Robert placed his hands on both our shoulders, his voice breaking as he said, "Your father was the best of men." We arranged the funeral together, moving through those first days in a fog of shared loss. Eliza suggested we stay at Dad's house, to be close to his memory, she said. I agreed, finding comfort in the familiar creaks of the old Victorian home where we'd grown up. I didn't notice then how she systematically went through his office each night while I slept. I didn't see how she studied me when she thought I wasn't looking. I was too consumed by grief to recognize the calculation behind her sympathetic smiles. But on the third night after the funeral, I woke to the sound of papers rustling. Following the noise to Dad's study, I caught a glimpse of Eliza hastily closing a drawer as I entered. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. She turned, startled, then composed herself with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just looking for the insurance papers. The funeral home called." I nodded, too exhausted to question further. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something that would later become significant. Dad's antique desk had been moved slightly from its usual position against the wall. Little did I know, that moment marked the beginning of a war, one that would expose the fault lines in our family and reveal secrets my father had taken to his grave. First signs of betrayal. The reading of the will was scheduled for exactly 1 week after the funeral. I remember the morning vividly, how the rain tapped against the windows of Mr. Harrington's law office, how the leather chair squeaked beneath me as I shifted uncomfortably. Eliza sat perfectly still beside me, her designer blazer impeccable, not a hair out of place despite the humidity. "Ladies, before we begin," Mr. Harrington said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, "your father wanted me to express how proud he was of both of you." I nodded, feeling tears threaten again. Eliza simply checked her watch. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat and began reading. Most of it was as expected. The family home to be shared between us, the savings split equally, Dad's collection of rare books to me, I was the only one who appreciated them, and his vintage car to Eliza. But then came the surprise. "And to my daughter Rachel, I leave the contents of the blue lockbox in my study, along with the sum contained in the Monarch investment account." Eliza's head snapped up. "What Monarch account?" Mr. Harrington looked at her over his glasses. "A separate investment portfolio your father established approximately 15 years ago. The current value is—" He named a figure that made my breath catch. "That's impossible," Eliza said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Dad would have mentioned something that significant? It was your father's explicit wish that this account be left solely to Rachel," Mr. Harrington replied firmly. The drive home was silent, tension filling the car like smoke. I tried to break it once. "I had no idea about any of this. Dad never—" "Of course you didn't," Eliza cut me off, her voice honeyed but cold. "You were always so busy with your own life, weren't you? Meanwhile, I was the one handling his affairs for the past 5 years. That night, I overheard her on the phone in hushed tones. It doesn't make sense, Robert. She barely visited until the end, and suddenly she gets the lion's share. We need to look into this." The next morning, subtle comments began. "It's strange how Dad changed in those final weeks," she remarked over coffee. "The medication made him so confused. By afternoon, she was reminiscing about how Dad had always worried about your financial judgment, Rach. Remember that investment you made in your friend's startup? He bailed you out so quietly. A painful memory, one I thought only Dad and I knew about. 3 days after the will reading, I noticed my father's antique Rolex was missing from his dresser. When I mentioned it, Eliza's response was immediate. He gave that to me months ago. You wouldn't know since you were only around at the very end. The accusation stung like a slap, but it was only the beginning. The following day, I went looking for the blue box Dad had mentioned. The study had been meticulously organized, too organized. Files that had been haphazardly stacked were now arranged alphabetically. Drawers that had been stuffed full were now neatly sorted, and the blue box was nowhere to be found. When I confronted Eliza, her expression of confusion seemed rehearsed. "A blue box? I haven't seen anything like that. Are you sure Dad wasn't confused when he mentioned it?" That evening, Uncle Robert stopped by unannounced. Over dinner, he casually mentioned how difficult managing money could be for creative types like me. "Your father often expressed concerns," he added, not quite meeting my eyes. As he was leaving, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "If you're feeling overwhelmed by this inheritance situation, I'm happy to step in, for both your sakes." I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, a chill running down my spine as I realized this wasn't grief or coincidence. This was coordinated. They were trying to manipulate me into giving up what my father had explicitly left to me. The question was why? What was in that blue box that was worth destroying our relationship over? The escalation. 2 weeks after Dad's death, I was sorting through his clothes when I found the key. Small, ornate, with a tarnished brass finish, tucked into the inner pocket of his favorite tweed jacket. I knew immediately it was important, though I had no idea what it might open. That same afternoon, I decided to conduct a methodical search of Dad's study while Eliza was at her therapy appointment. I started with the obvious places: drawers, cabinets, bookshelves, before moving to the less obvious. Checking behind pictures, tapping walls for hollow spaces, looking under furniture. That's when I noticed it. The antique Persian rug beneath Dad's desk was slightly askew. I pulled it back to reveal a section of floorboard that looked subtly different from the others around it. Heart racing, I pried it up with a letter opener and found a shallow compartment containing a manila folder. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Copies of Dad's will, but not the version Mr. Harrington had read. In these pages, The Monarch account was split equally between Eliza and me. There were also bank statements showing large withdrawals made in the months before Dad's death, labeled simply EL, Eliza's initials. Most disturbing of all, I found a power of attorney document with Dad's signature at the bottom. The date caught my eye immediately. It was signed 3 days after he'd been admitted to hospice and heavily medicated. I'd been with him that day. He could barely hold a cup of water, let alone sign his name. My hands trembled as I photographed everything with my phone before carefully returning the documents exactly as I'd found them. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrington's office, only to be told he was unavailable and that my Uncle Robert had requested all communications go through him as family representative. When I hung up, I found Eliza watching me from the doorway. "Everything okay?" she asked, voice dripping with concern while her eyes remained calculating. "Just checking on some paperwork," I replied, matching her false lightness. "By the way, I was thinking of inviting some of Dad's old colleagues to a memorial dinner. Do you have Jackson Miller's contact information? Dad always spoke so highly of him." Eliza's smile faltered slightly. Jackson Miller had been Dad's financial advisor and one person who might know about the Monarch account. "I don't think that's necessary," she said. "We should keep things small, intimate, family only." That afternoon, she made a point of showing me a folder of medical records, notes from Dad's doctors detailing his declining mental state, and periods of confusion and paranoia in his final weeks. "I didn't want to show you these," she said, voice soft with manufactured sympathy. "I know how much it meant to you to believe he was lucid until the end." I maintained my composure, but inside, fury bloomed. I recognized the doctor's signature on those notes, Dr. Harrison, the same doctor who had told me privately how remarkably clear-minded my father had remained despite his physical deterioration. The next day, Aunt Deborah called, Dad's sister, whom we rarely saw because she and Eliza had never gotten along. "Rachel, I'm concerned," she said without preamble. "Robert called me saying you've been making wild accusations, that you're not coping well with your father's death." "What? I haven't spoken to Robert in days," I replied, stunned. "He said you've been having episodes, claiming your father left you some secret fortune." "Honey, I'm worried about you." As the days passed, more relatives called with similar concerns. Childhood friends reached out, awkwardly offering support for my difficult time. I began to feel like I was living in some alternate reality, one where I was painted as unstable, greedy, delusional. Even my cousin Megan, who I'd always been close with, pulled me aside at a family dinner and whispered, "Everyone's worried about you, Rach. Maybe you should see someone." Grief can do strange things to a person's mind. For one terrible moment, standing in Dad's kitchen surrounded by concerned faces, I actually questioned myself. Had I misunderstood? Was I connecting dots that weren't there? The gaslighting was so complete, so effective, that I felt my own certainty begin to crumble. That night, alone in my childhood bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and whispered, "Dad, what am I missing? What were you trying to tell me?" The answer came in an unexpected flash of memory. Dad teaching me chess when I was 9 years old. "The most important pieces," he'd said, "aren't always the most obvious ones, Rachel. Sometimes the game is won by the pieces your opponent overlooks." I sat up, suddenly alert. The blue box, the key, the documents hidden under the floorboard. I'd been so focused on what I'd found that I hadn't considered what I still hadn't found, the blue box itself. They were closing in around me, isolating me, making me doubt my own sanity. But one thing was becoming devastatingly clear. This wasn't just about money. There was something else. Something in that blue box that Eliza was desperate to keep hidden. And I was running out of time to discover what it was. The breaking point. The family meeting was Eliza's idea. "To clear the air," she said, though her smile never reached her eyes. We gathered in Dad's living room on a Sunday afternoon. Uncle Robert, Aunt Deborah, our cousins, and Mr. Harrington, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. I arrived early, hoping to speak with Mr. Harrington alone, but Eliza had beaten me to it. They were huddled in the kitchen, their conversation stopping abruptly when I entered. "Rachel, Mr. Harrington nodded, not quite meeting my gaze. I was just telling Eliza how these situations can be complicated. By the time everyone arrived, the stage was perfectly set. Family photos had been strategically placed around the room, mostly featuring Eliza with Dad. The side table displayed Dad's medications, medical bills, and caregiving schedules, all with Eliza's name prominently featured. I sat alone on the smaller sofa while Eliza took Dad's armchair, a subtle power play that wasn't lost on me. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "We're here because we all love this family, and we're concerned about recent developments." Eliza dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I didn't want it to come to this, Rachel. I've tried to speak with you privately, but you've been so different since Dad died." The ambush unfolded with military precision. One by one, family members expressed concerns about my behavior, my obsession with the inheritance, my accusations. Each testimony built upon the last, creating a narrative of a grief-stricken daughter who'd lost touch with reality. "Remember when she dropped out of law school to find herself?" Aunt Deborah added. Edward was devastated. "She's always been impulsive." I sat in stunned silence, watching people who'd known me my entire life paint me as unstable, unreliable, and money-hungry. Then came Eliza's masterstroke. She opened a leather portfolio and slid several documents across the coffee table. "I've been trying to protect you," she said, voice breaking perfectly on cue. "But I have to show everyone the truth now." The papers included bank statements showing withdrawals from my account, coinciding with Dad's missing Rolex and other valuables. Credit card statements highlighting purchases I'd supposedly made during Dad's illness. Expensive restaurants, concert tickets, a weekend spa retreat. All forgeries, all lies, but executed with such precision that even I found myself momentarily questioning my memory. "Rachel was drowning in debt," Eliza continued. "Dad helped her so many times. The separate inheritance was just his way of making sure she'd be taken care of, knowing how she struggles with money." Mr. Harrington shifted uncomfortably but said nothing to contradict her. "That's not true," I finally managed, my voice sounding thin even to my own ears. "Dad never bailed me out. I've managed my own finances since college." Uncle Robert shook his head sadly. "Your father confided in me, Rachel. He was worried about you, about what you might do when he was gone." The final blow came when Eliza produced a psychiatric evaluation, a complete fabrication, suggesting Dad had been experiencing delusions near the end, including paranoia about his finances. "The Monarch account," she explained gently, "was something he created during a confused period. His actual intention, as he explained to me many times, was for it to support both of us." She slid a document across the table. "An amendment to the will, with a signature that resembled Dad's but wasn't quite right. I'd seen enough of his signatures on birthday cards and school permission slips to know the difference. This is what Dad really wanted," she said. "Equal shares, as it should be. But if you keep pushing this delusion about secret boxes and hidden fortunes, we'll have no choice but to seek professional intervention." The threat hung in the air, crystal clear. Either I accepted their version of events, or they'd have me declared mentally incompetent. Mr. Harrington finally spoke up. "Perhaps a compromise is in order. The house and basic assets divided equally, with the Monarch account placed in a trust managed by Robert until certain matters are resolved." They all nodded, relieved at this reasonable solution. All eyes turned to me, waiting for my capitulation. In that moment, I felt utterly alone. The weight of their collective gaslighting pressed down on me like a physical force. For a split second, I almost gave in. Almost believed that maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe Dad had been confused. Maybe I was the problem. Then I noticed something. On the mantelpiece behind Eliza sat a family photo I'd never seen before. Dad, Eliza, and me at the beach. But the proportions were slightly off. The lighting inconsistent. It was photoshopped. Expertly, but noticeably to someone who'd actually been there that day. Because that day had never existed. The realization hit me like a thunderbolt. They weren't just manipulating the inheritance. They were rewriting our entire family history. I stood up, gathering my composure. "I need some time to think about all this," I said. my voice steadier than I felt. "Of course, sweetheart." Eliza smiled triumphantly. "Take all the time you need. The papers will be ready when you are." I walked out, got in my car, and broke down completely. Tears blurred my vision as I pulled away from the house where I'd grown up, now transformed into the headquarters of an elaborate conspiracy against me. The ultimatum was clear: accept a fraction of what Dad intended for me, or be labeled unstable and potentially lose everything, including my credibility and freedom. As I sat there sobbing in the parking lot of a roadside diner miles from home, I realized I had reached the breaking point. I could surrender to their version of reality, or I could fight back. But to fight, I needed evidence. I needed that blue box. What I didn't know then was that I was about to uncover something far more valuable and far more devastating than money: the hidden truth. I didn't go back to Dad's house that night. Instead, I checked into a small motel on the outskirts of town, paid cash, and tried to think clearly through the fog of betrayal and doubt. This wasn't just about greed. The elaborate lengths Eliza was going to, forging documents, manipulating family members, creating false evidence, suggested something deeper was at stake. Something in that blue box terrified her. At 3 a.m., I made a decision. I needed to search the house one more time, but I couldn't risk another confrontation. I'd have to go when no one was there. 2 days later, I got my chance. Uncle Robert called to inform me that he was taking Eliza to meet with financial advisors regarding the new arrangement. His tone made it clear I wasn't invited. The meeting would last all day. I waited until I was certain they'd left, then used my key to enter the silent house. It felt different now, hostile, as if the walls themselves were watching me. I went straight to Dad's study and began a systematic search. For 3 hours, I combed through every inch of that room. I checked behind books, inside furniture, under floorboards. Nothing. The key I'd found burned in my pocket, mocking me with its presence while its lock remained hidden. Exhausted and desperate, I sank into Dad's leather chair and closed my eyes. What was I missing? The most important pieces aren't always the most obvious ones. Dad's voice echoed in my memory. I opened my eyes and really looked at the study for the first time. Not searching, just seeing. The books on the shelves, the paintings on the walls, the heavy mahogany desk where Dad had written letters and paid bills, and the desk. It had always been positioned at an angle in the corner, but now it sat flush against the wall. I'd noticed it before but hadn't thought about why. I pushed the desk away from the wall, my heart pounding. There, revealed in the corner, was a small wall safe disguised by the wainscoting. A keyhole, tiny and discreet, waited in its center. With trembling hands, I inserted the brass key from Dad's jacket. It turned with a satisfying click. Inside wasn't the blue box I'd expected, but a single envelope with my name written in Dad's distinctive handwriting. I opened it to find a note and another key, newer, silver. Rachel. The note read, "If you're reading this, then things have unfolded as I feared they might. The blue box is in the attic, hidden in the false bottom of your mother's old cedar chest. The truth inside may be painful, but it's time you knew. Whatever happens, remember that I have always loved you, both of you, in my own imperfect way. Dad." The attic, of course. The one place in the house I avoided because of the memories it held. After Mom died, Dad had moved all her belongings there, and I'd found it too painful to visit. I climbed the narrow stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. The attic was stifling, dust particles dancing in the shafts of afternoon light that streamed through the small windows. In the far corner stood Mom's cedar chest, untouched for over a decade. I knelt beside it, lifted the heavy lid. The familiar scent of cedar mixed with Mom's perfume brought tears to my eyes. Inside were her sweaters, photo albums, journals, preserved exactly as they'd been when she died. I carefully removed each item, setting them aside with reverence. When the chest appeared empty, I ran my fingers along the bottom, searching for any irregularity. Near the back right corner, I felt it, a slight gap. I pressed, and a section of the bottom lifted to reveal a hidden compartment. And there it was, the blue box. Small, metal, with a simple silver lock. My hands shook so badly I could barely insert the key. When I finally opened it, I found several items inside: a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, a DNA test report dated 15 years earlier, legal documents with official seals, and a small leather-bound journal. I started with the journal, opening to the first page where Dad's handwriting flowed across the paper. I've decided to record the truth here, where it can be safe until the right time comes. I've lived with this secret for too long, and the weight of it has distorted everything: my marriage, my relationship with my daughters, perhaps even my soul. I continued reading, each page revealing another layer of a story I'd never known, a story that rewrote my entire understanding of our family. The DNA test results confirmed what the journal suggested. The legal documents filled in the final pieces. By the time I finished reading, I sat back against the cedar chest, stunned into complete silence. The truth was both simpler and more devastating than anything I could have imagined. Eliza wasn't Dad's biological daughter, and she wasn't my full sister, but that was only the beginning of the secret, the smallest part of a truth so profound that it would shake the foundations of everything we believed about ourselves and each other. I carefully replaced everything in the blue box except for the journal and a few key documents. Those I tucked into my bag. As I closed the attic door behind me, I heard the front door open downstairs. They were back early. I froze, trapped between floors, clutching the evidence that could destroy everything Eliza had built, and perhaps destroy her too. In that moment, I had to decide: use the truth as a weapon, or try to understand why this secret had driven my sister to such desperate measures. What I didn't realize then was that the most shocking revelation was still waiting in those pages. A truth that would force me to question not just Eliza's actions, but Dad's as well. The painful past revealed. I slipped out through the back door, heart hammering against my ribs, the blue box and its contents safely in my bag. I could hear Eliza's voice drifting from the front of the house as I disappeared into the wooded area behind the property. That night, in the anonymity of my motel room, I spread the documents across the bed and began to truly absorb what I'd discovered. The journal told a story that spanned decades. It began 29 years ago when Dad, young and ambitious, had taken a business trip to Chicago. There, he'd had a brief affair with a woman named Catherine. When he returned home to Mom, he believed it was over, until Catherine called 3 months later to tell him she was pregnant. Dad wrote about his shame, his fear, his indecision, how he eventually confessed to Mom, who was already pregnant with me, how they'd fought and nearly divorced, how they'd ultimately made the painful decision to keep the secret buried. Catherine raised Eliza alone for the first 4 years of her life. Then came the tragedy, a car accident that left Catherine in a coma with little hope of recovery. With no other family to care for Eliza, Dad received a call from Catherine's lawyer. The next entry made my breath catch. I told Rebecca that Catherine had been my cousin, that Eliza was my niece. Another lie to cover the first. Rebecca, despite her pain over my earlier betrayal, opened our home to this innocent child who had lost everything. I watched my wife embrace my secret daughter while our own daughter, Rachel, just 2 years old, toddled over to meet her new cousin. For years, that was the arrangement. Eliza was introduced to the extended family as a distant relative we'd taken in after tragedy. But as time passed, the lines blurred. Dad wrote about how Eliza began calling them Mom and Dad, how they never corrected her, how the pretense of adoption became an unspoken reality. Then came the entry that made my heart shatter. Rebecca died today. My beautiful, forgiving wife, who raised another woman's child as her own, is gone. Her last words to me weren't about her pain or the cancer eating away at her body. They were about the girls. Tell them the truth, Edward, before it's too late. I promised her I would. Another lie. I had to stop reading several times, overwhelmed by the revelations. Mom had known. She'd known all along that Eliza wasn't just some distant relative, but Dad's child from an affair. And she'd loved her anyway. The DNA test had been conducted after Mom died. Dad, racked with guilt over his broken promise, had secretly confirmed what he already knew. The results were unequivocal. Eliza was his biological daughter. I was his biological daughter. We were half-sisters, bound by his blood, but separated by a chasm of secrets. But why had he kept it from us even after Mom was gone? The journal's later entries provided the devastating answer. I finally gathered the courage to tell Eliza the truth today. She was 17, old enough to understand, or so I thought. I explained everything. About Catherine, about the affair, about how we'd pretended she was a distant relative when she first came to live with us. I thought I was lifting a burden. Instead, I broke something in her that I fear can never be repaired. Dad described Eliza's reaction in painful detail. Her shock, her rage, her complete psychological collapse. How she'd run away for 3 days. How when she returned, hollow-eyed and distant, she had made him promise never to tell anyone else, especially me. She made me swear that as far as the world was concerned, as far as Rachel was concerned, nothing had changed. She would continue to be my adopted daughter, the child we took in out of kindness. The truth about Catherine would remain buried. If you ever tell Rachel, she said, I will disappear, and you will never see me again. The terror in her eyes told me she meant it. Dad had honored that promise for a decade, watching as Eliza constructed an elaborate facade of normality while inwardly struggling with her identity. He wrote about her obsession with family photos, with creating evidence of a childhood that never existed, how she would sometimes slip and call him Edward instead of Dad when they were alone, how she flinched whenever anyone commented on family resemblances. The final entries in the journal, written during his illness, revealed his mounting regret. I've created this mess through decades of cowardice and half-truths. Eliza shapes herself into whatever she thinks a daughter should be, performing the role rather than living it. And Rachel, my honest, straightforward Rachel, has no idea that the sister she grew up with carries such a burden of pain and secrets. I fear what will happen when I'm gone. I fear Eliza will do anything to protect the narrative she's built around herself. The last entry was dated just 2 weeks before his death. I've made provisions in my will that may force the truth into the open. The Monarch account, named for Catherine, who loved butterflies, contains not just money, but the means for both my daughters to finally know each other truly. I've instructed Harrington to handle it, though I worry about Robert's influence over him. If something goes wrong, I've created a contingency. Rachel will find it if she needs to. She always was better at solving puzzles than anyone else in the family. I sat back, the journal closing in my lap, as the full weight of the situation settled over me. This wasn't just about an inheritance. This was about identity, about belonging, about a lifetime of carefully constructed lies that had shaped both Eliza and me in ways we'd never understood. The money in the Monarch account, I now realized it was meant for both of us. Dad's final attempt to provide for Eliza while acknowledging her true place in the family. But Eliza had seen it differently, as a threat to the identity she'd clung to for survival. All her manipulation, the gaslighting, the forged documents, they weren't driven primarily by greed, but by terror. Terror that the truth would come out, that the family would know, that I would know, that she wasn't really my sister at all, but a stranger's child, brought into our home through my father's infidelity. Except she was wrong. She was my sister, not through some legal fiction, but through blood, a truth she had been running from for 10 years. As dawn broke, I knew what I had to do. The family meeting was scheduled for tomorrow, with lawyers present, documents ready to be signed, the amended will ready to be executed. Eliza thought she was orchestrating her final victory. Instead, she was about to face the very truth she'd spent a lifetime trying to escape, the confrontation. The conference room at Harrington's law firm felt unnaturally cold. I'd arrived early, placing the blue box in the center of the polished mahogany table, a silent declaration of war. Around me sat the family, their expressions ranging from concern, Aunt Deborah, to smug satisfaction, Uncle Robert, to barely concealed triumph, Eliza. Mr. Harrington entered last, his usually confident stride faltering when he saw me already seated. More telling was his reaction to the blue box, a flash of recognition, quickly suppressed. "I see we're all here," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "We've prepared the documents as discussed. the amendment to Edward's will, redistributing the monarch account equally, and the establishment of the family trust with Robert as executor. Uncle Robert nodded gravely, as if accepting some great responsibility. It's what Edward would have wanted, for the good of both his girls. I remained silent, waiting. Let them believe they'd won. Let them think I'd surrendered. Eliza reached across the table, her manicured hand covering mine in a gesture of false reconciliation. I know this has been difficult, Rachel, but I truly believe this is what Dad intended all along. I withdrew my hand and finally spoke. Before we sign anything, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. I tapped the blue box. Or rather, the blue box on the table. Eliza's face drained of color. Mr. Harrington shifted uncomfortably. "What is that?" Uncle Robert demanded, though his eyes betrayed that he already knew. "This," I said, "is what Dad meant for me to find. The truth he wanted revealed after he was gone." Eliza's voice was barely audible. "Rachel, please," I cut her off. "No more manipulation. No more lies." I opened the box and removed the journal. Dad kept a record of everything. For the next 10 minutes, I read selected passages aloud. The affair, Catherine's pregnancy, Mom's forgiveness, Eliza's integration into our family under false pretenses, the DNA test confirming our shared paternity, Eliza's breakdown upon learning the truth, and her demand that I never be told. With each revelation, the atmosphere in the room transformed. Aunt Deborah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Uncle Robert sat back, his confidence evaporating. Mr. Harrington stared fixedly at his folded hands. And Eliza seemed to physically shrink, her carefully constructed persona crumbling before our eyes. When I finished reading, the silence was absolute. Then Eliza spoke, her voice hollow. "You had no right." "I had every right," I countered. "This is my family history too. My sister. My truth." "I am not your sister," she hissed, an outburst so raw that everyone flinched. "I'm nobody's daughter, nobody's sister. I'm just a mistake. The living evidence of your father's betrayal." I placed the DNA results on the table. "Science disagrees. We share 25% of our DNA. Half siblings." She pushed the paper away violently. "A genetic accident. It means nothing." "It meant something to Mom," I said quietly. "She knew exactly who you were, and she loved you anyway. Completely, without reservation." Eliza's composure fractured entirely. Tears streamed down her face, smearing her perfect makeup. She pitied me, the poor orphan, the living reminder of her husband's infidelity. I shook my head. "No, she chose you. Every day she chose you. Dad's journal makes that clear. When he confessed about Catherine, Mom could have left. She could have demanded he never contact you. Instead, she opened our home to you when you had nowhere else to go." Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "I think we should postpone this discussion until you can regroup?" I interrupted. "Until you can find a new way to manipulate the situation?" I turned to Mr. Harrington. "You knew about all of this, didn't you? Dad told you everything." Mr. Harrington nodded slowly. "He did. The Monarch account was set up for both of you. Funds from the sale of Catherine's estate after her death, plus what Edward added over the years. He intended it as acknowledgement of Eliza's true place in the family." "My true place?" Eliza laughed bitterly. "What exactly is that? The secret daughter? The living reminder of his greatest shame?" I reached across the table, not to touch her, but to place Mom's journal beside Dad's. "I found this too. Mom's private thoughts. About you." Eliza stared at it, frozen. She writes about the day you arrived, how terrified you were, how small your hand felt in hers, how you wouldn't speak for days, and then how one morning you asked her if you could call her Mom, because you missed saying that word. Eliza's shoulders began to shake. She writes about teaching you to bake cookies, about brushing your hair before school, about how you and I would fall asleep together during thunderstorms because you were scared and I was too. But somehow together we felt brave. I opened the journal to a marked page. This entry is from just before she died. She writes, My greatest comfort is knowing my girls will have each other when I'm gone. They are so different. Rachel with her quiet determination, Eliza with her brilliant fire. But the bond between them is unbreakable. Edward worries about telling them the truth someday, but I don't. Sisters are sisters, no matter how they come to each other. The room was silent except for Eliza's quiet sobs. You've spent 10 years running from who you are, I continued gently, constructing this perfect daughter persona, terrified that if anyone knew the truth, you wouldn't belong anymore. You've lied, manipulated, and nearly destroyed our relationship to protect a secret that never needed protecting. I stood up and walked around the table to her side. But here's what you never understood, Eliza. You were never Edward's secret shame. You were his daughter. You are my sister. Not because of some legal fiction, but by blood and by choice. Mom's choice, Dad's choice, and mine. Uncle Robert attempted to interject. This is all very moving, but it doesn't change the legal. Actually, it changes everything, Mr. Harrington interrupted, finding his courage at last. Edward's will is explicit. The inheritance is to be divided equally between his daughters, both of them. As his biological children, both Rachel and Eliza have equal claim. The monarch account was always intended for both of them. Eliza looked up, confusion breaking through her tears. What? I explained the final piece, how Dad had indeed created the account for both of us, but separated it to ensure the truth would come out. He knew how desperately you wanted to keep the secret, Eliza, but he also knew the secret was destroying you from the inside. This was his final attempt to free you from it. The family members watched in stunned silence as years of carefully constructed narratives collapsed around them. Uncle Robert's influence, built on his role as the family's moral authority, evaporated as his complicity in the deception became clear. Aunt Deborah wept quietly, perhaps for her brother's complicated legacy, perhaps for the nieces who had carried such burdens. And Eliza and I stared at each other across a gulf of revelations, seeing one another truly for perhaps the first time in our lives. What happens now? She whispered. It was the question that would define everything that followed. The papers remained unsigned that day. Instead, Mr. Harrington suggested we take time to process everything before making any legal decisions. As we left his office, Eliza and I walked side by side in silence. Not the hostile silence of recent weeks, but something more contemplative, more raw. I need some time, she finally said as we reached the parking lot. Her voice was different, stripped of its usual polish, revealing the vulnerability beneath. I understand, I replied, and I did. The days that followed were quiet. I moved back into a hotel, giving Eliza space in Dad's house, our house now. We communicated through brief texts, practical matters only. The family, shocked by the revelations, retreated to process their own reactions. Uncle Robert, his influence diminished, made half-hearted attempts at reconciliation that neither of us was ready to accept. A week after the confrontation, I received a text from Eliza. Coffee? The place on Maple. 2 p.m. The cafe was neutral territory, somewhere we'd never been together. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of her usual perfect styling. She looked younger, more like the sister I remembered from childhood. I've been reading Mom's journal, she said without preamble as I sat down. All of it. I nodded, waiting. She knew. Eliza continued, her voice tinged with wonder. From the very beginning, she knew exactly who I was, and she chose me anyway. She did. I always thought, Eliza's voice caught. I always thought she accepted me out of pity or obligation. I never believed she could really love me the same way she loved you. But she did, I said softly. She did, Eliza echoed. There's an entry from my 6th birthday. She writes about how proud she was watching me blow out the candles, how grateful she felt that I had come into her life. She calls me the daughter of my heart, if not my body. We sat in silence for a moment, both absorbing the weight of this revelation. I need to explain, Eliza finally said. Not to justify what I did, but so you might understand. She told me about that terrible day when Dad had revealed the truth to her. how it had shattered her entire sense of self, how the story she'd been told, that she was a distant relative they'd graciously taken in, was suddenly replaced by something far more painful. She was the product of an affair, living proof of Dad's betrayal of Mom. "I couldn't bear it," she said. "I couldn't bear to be that person, the walking reminder of the worst thing Dad ever did. So I decided I wouldn't be. I would be the perfect daughter instead, the one who never caused problems, who took care of everything, who made him proud enough to make up for the shame of my existence. And then when he got sick, I panicked," she admitted. "I was terrified that in his final days he would confess everything to you, that you would look at me and see not your sister, but something tainted. So you tried to control the narrative," I said, understanding flooding through me. "The manipulated photos, the forged documents, the campaign to discredit me. It was all to protect the identity you'd created for yourself." She nodded, shame evident in her expression. "When I found out about the Monarch account, I was convinced it was his way of acknowledging the truth publicly. I couldn't let that happen. But Eliza, the truth was never what you feared it was," I said gently. "Being Dad's biological daughter doesn't make you the embodiment of his mistake. It makes you my sister. Truly, genetically, irrevocably my sister." Her eyes filled with tears. "I've spent so long running from who I am that I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to just be Eliza." That conversation marked the beginning, not of an immediate reconciliation, but of a slow, careful reconstruction. We decided to postpone any decisions about the inheritance for 3 months, giving ourselves time to rebuild something more important than financial security, our relationship as sisters. We began with small steps. Coffee once a week became dinner. We sorted through Dad's belongings together, each item a potential landmine of memories, but also an opportunity for new understanding. We visited Mom's grave together for the first time in years, standing shoulder to shoulder in the soft autumn light. One evening, as we sorted through old photo albums, Eliza suddenly laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard in years. "What?" I asked. She pointed to a childhood photo of us at the beach, a real one this time. "Look at us. Same nose, same chin. How did I never see it before?" I smiled. "Dad used to say we both had his mother's eyes. He was right," she said softly. "I see it now." 3 months to the day after our confrontation in Mr. Harrington's office, we met again. Not in his formal conference room, but in Dad's study. We had reached our decision. The inheritance would be divided exactly as Dad intended, equally between his daughters. The house would remain in both our names. The Monarch account would fund a foundation in Catherine's memory, supporting children who had lost parents. As we signed the papers, Eliza paused, pen hovering over the signature line. "I need to say something," she said. "I'm sorry. For everything. The manipulation, the lies, all of it." "I know," I replied simply. "I don't expect forgiveness." "You have it anyway," I interrupted. "Not because what you did wasn't wrong, but because I understand why you did it. Fear makes us do desperate things sometimes." She signed her name, then looked up at me. "What happens now?" It was the same question she had asked in the aftermath of the revelation. But this time, I had an answer. "Now we start over," I said. "Not as the people we've been pretending to be, but as who we really are. Sisters, for better or worse." Later that evening, we sat on the back porch of the house we now truly shared, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The weight of secrets had lifted, leaving something fragile but genuine in its place. "Do you think Dad would be proud of us?" Eliza asked. "For finding our way back to each other?" I thought about Dad's journal, about his hopes and fears for his daughters, about the complicated legacy he'd left us to untangle. "I think," I said carefully, "that he would be relieved, that we found the truth, and that the truth set us both free." Eliza nodded, understanding. "Not just his truth, our truth." As twilight settled around us, I realized something profound. The inheritance that mattered most had never been about money at all. It was this, the chance to know and be known, to break free from the weight of secrets, to rebuild what had been broken. "My name is Rachel," I'm 27, and I discovered that sometimes the family you fight for isn't defined by perfect memories or legal documents. Sometimes it's forged in the fire of painful truths and difficult reckonings. My sister tried to steal my inheritance, but in the end, we both found something far more valuable than money. We found each other, and the courage to finally be who we really are.